we ready?
Doug says he's ready.
All right. I was waiting for Doug in the back room because we are taping this one, so watch out for bloopers, guys. Again, Mary Kay Roth, Brenda Lejadro, who is the coordinator for LPS supervisors. I can never get that right. Supervisors for LPS counselors and school social workers, and Joe Wright, who is our director of security. I know that everybody in this room probably got into public education because you believe in education and you want to tell the good stories of public education, and that's what we're all about. And good grief, how much time do we spend with things that go wrong? And there are so many every single day. And what I've found is that the secret to surviving a crisis is to have a fabulous team do that crisis with you and walk through it, because that is the power of understanding how you make sure that you're going to survive at the end. Our goal today is when you feel like this, I believe this is how we all feel when something goes wrong. I want you to be able to feel like this by the end of the session when something goes wrong. So what we like to do with this session is we chose a couple of real life things that happened this year. There were so many choices from which to choose. We chose two. We're going to walk through them, and we're going to ask you to help us feel your way through, okay, what would you do, and what are we going to do, and how are we going to make sure that we get from step to step. So we're relying on your help with this. So we're going to let Brenda Lejadro guide us to the very first one.
Okay, so sometimes the crisis starts with something as simple as a notification that comes across your phone, and you know that it's going to change your whole evening. I was at Parthenon, 5 o'clock one Thursday evening in early May, and I got an alert, and you just have a sort of sinking feeling. The alert said that there were 2 adults killed in a shooting in North Lincoln. There were 5 children at home at the time, or it might not have said 5, but it said there were children. So when you get something like that, what are some of the things that you think of right off the bat? The children. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And what about that?
Safety.
Right. Are the kids safe? Were they injured? What did they see? Are they our students? I think that's the first question.
It's amazing.
We don't know.
Is this on?
Should be.
It's amazing how many principals we immediately start hearing from. Do you know whose children those were? Do you know if those were our students?
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
And what surprised me about the news story when it came out, it did say 5. And if you know how snoopy people are and how much information is available online, open source information, the news people reported what block it's on. They'll never say the address, but they'll say the 1300 block of A Street, and they said 5 kids. That is really simple. With open source information, if you have an internet connection, you can figure out who that family is in a heartbeat. So I knew a lot of people right away were going to know who this family was.
And you can certainly try and start figuring out which school. You don't know because there are parochial schools, there are people who homeschool their kids. Not everybody goes to school in the same attendance area, but when you look at that address, you start getting a sense of, well, it looks like it could be this school.
Okay, so those are definitely the questions that come to everybody's mind. So this is a Thursday evening, and one of our principals was preparing to have a concert at her school. And so she wasn't aware of much of what was happening out in the neighborhood, but this event happened a block from her school. So as families started to arrive for the concert, what did they see? Police presence, crime scene tape, a lot of activity in the area. And parents were gathered in the multipurpose room, and she was ready to go in and start the program. So she thinks, I'm not really sure what's going on. I haven't heard anything. What could she do to find out some information? Ideas?
Depending on the protocols you have developed, reach out to your school resource officer and see if they have any information that they can disclose.
Exactly. Or Joe Wright,
Very good.
Director of Security.
That was like a chorus. Joe Wright.
So if you're an administrator, you have Joe on speed dial. You've got his cell phone, and Joe, it's been permanently attached to Joe. He's never far from it. So a great thing to do anytime there's a question and you know it involves a possible police activity or action, give Joe a call. Joe is a former Lincoln Police Department captain, and so he's still got great connections with people at LPD. And he helps us tremendously through these kind of situations. So giving Joe a call was the next step, finding out what's happening in this area and what can I tell my families. So what she was able to do is tell the families that the police had assured us that there was no threat to the public, that there had been a shooting, there was no threat. So she was able to go into the multipurpose room and talk to the families and say, you know, we don't have a lot of details on what's going on, but I can assure you that you're safe here and that there's no ongoing threat as you move about this area, which is an important step, but it also increases the anxiety of everybody in that room about, well, then what did happen? Something bad happened. Who is it? These are our neighbors. These are people who probably go to our school. Everybody who has an alert on their phone knows that there were kids involved. Is this a friend of my child's? Is this somebody who I know through other channels? So it really changed the tone of the event at school that night. And that's an important thing to remember, because it's an event that happened in the neighborhood, but look at the impact on the school. And that's one of the criteria that we look at when we decide what kind of response we have with the crisis team. So the crisis team will respond whenever there's a death of a student or a staff member in a building. But the crisis team may also respond if there's a significant event in the community, in that neighborhood around the school. So that started to make us think, you know, this will be a potential crisis team response the next day because of the impact on so many kids and families who were coming to school and seeing the police activity a block from their building.
And if this would have happened during the day, then we would have, one of the reasons such an important question is there a threat? That's when you have to ask yourself, are you closing the school? Are you doing lockdown, lockout, or all those different kinds of things? It would have been, I always say, wouldn't this have been interesting? It would have been interesting for me if this was a threat at night, because we'd never done, like, people at a concert, are you going to do, are you going to lock the school with everybody at the concert? So that would have been an interesting question for me. What would you have done if they told us there was a threat to the neighborhood? But at night presents a little bit of a different issue than if it would have happened during the day.
And as we start to pre-plan asking the police what kind of presence will be there depending on the nature of the incident, will they be there in the morning, will any streets be closed down? Because then we're going to call transportation, because they're going to have to reroute buses, or we're going to have messages going out in terms of have kids walk this way, not that way. So you got to think ahead about a shift ahead.
And a recurring theme when we talk about crises is you're going to start hearing from news reporters right away. So when all of us see children, news reporters see children. And so they immediately are going to start calling us saying, are those students, where do they go to school? Now, at this point, I am telling them that night, way too early, we have no idea. And we will tell principals, and they are so wonderful, if you get a phone call, send them back to LPS Communications. You don't have to deal with that. We will deal with that.
So anything else you can think of that might have been helpful to do right at that point?
We're always looking
we'll go
for
on.
we're always looking for advice.
Yeah. So by Thursday evening, 10 p.m. news let us know that, and this was taken directly from Channel 8, a woman who lives across the street told Channel 8 Eyewitness News she was home when the shooting happened. She said she heard screaming and went outside to find the couple's 5 children running out of the home. So that's all we knew officially at 10 o'clock that night. and that the names of the family members involved were not being released.
So there's a relationship with law enforcement that you can have, and if you want to keep that relationship and that trust, sometimes we know things, but they're classified that we don't know. And that's to help us assure people there's no threat here. It helps us get a step ahead in terms of being prepared for the next day. But there's a real clear, at least to me, a real clear ethical line that if we get told information for a certain reason, that we can't go outside those boundaries. So as you work with your partners who have information, who can share information with you, I get total respect from everyone else in the district when I say, you know, I can tell you, but please don't tell anyone else. We have to keep this tight. I've never had anyone violate that, and that's why I still get information from police and fire, because that trust is there.
So keeping that in mind, we have some information, but the information is absolutely not available for sharing. So how do you prepare when you have some ideas, you know who is involved, but you cannot breach the trust of the Lincoln Police Department? What might you do?
And at this point, we're pretty sure which school, right?
Yeah, we know the schools.
So we know
and
the school now. So
yeah,
now we know the school.
And another concern I had, and I'm not an educator, and I have to guess about a lot of stuff. I pretend on the pros, or depend on the pros to help me out. But my fear was, depending how this family was going to deal with things, because we didn't know. It's slim, but there's a possibility that one of these kids could come to school the next day. We didn't know the disposition of the children in terms, we knew that they were safe people, but we didn't know what the plan was for the next day, because no one else really knew either, considering the huge trauma here. So I was worried. I'm talking to people, talking to Brenda, saying, what if one of these kids comes to school the next day, if someone decides that's the right thing to do?
So what we did is prepared a message that was pretty vague, but provided some help to teachers if they had students who were talking about the incident, or if the students themselves and that family came to school. We asked the principals to be sure to have someone watching for the kids in case the kids did come, and they could immediately take them to the office, and then we could provide support from our social workers, our counselors, our psychologists. And let me just briefly introduce Ursula Vernon Hansen. She stepped into the back of the room. Ursula is our partner on the crisis team. She's the team leader for the LPS crisis team.
And she's wonderful.
She is. So one of the things that happens when this starts is that we immediately notify Ursula. There's an incident. We don't know a lot of details yet, but please have your teams on standby so that we can provide the support at the school if necessary. So Ursula was the first call I made after I got the information from Joe. So anyway, the principals have a little more detail. They're watching for the students who might come to school who were directly involved, but we're also asking them to send a note to their staff that gives them a little bit of detail. You know, the message was this: you likely heard the news reports of a man and woman killed in a North Lincoln home Thursday night. Reports indicated there were 5 children in the home. At this point, the names have not been released, and we're unable to confirm if the children involved are students of Lincoln Public Schools. As we get information, we'll keep you posted. Although we don't have details, we know it's possible children in the neighborhood and at our schools may be impacted by this event. As you meet with classes, please pay attention to the comments students may be making, and invite anyone who might be struggling to visit with counselors, social workers, administrators, teachers, or other caring adults at your school. And then we have some questions that they could use in their classroom to facilitate discussion if it seems that the whole class is buzzing and talking and all of that. So a big reminder at this point is that a family has a right to privacy, and we need to respect and honor that, even if it means that we can't share with students or staff the information that they would really like to have. The family does get to be the driver of a lot of information too, and they were requesting privacy. So we needed to be pretty vague about what we could share.
It's also interesting to watch. We have a Google Doc open, and you've got Brenda or Ursula thank goodness, writing the message. And these kind of communications will write a lot of messages, but when it comes to situations like this, they will often lead the message in a very sensitive way. But we'll often have like, here's plan A, here's plan B, here's plan C. So we'll have like 3 permutations of the letter if we go in this direction or this direction. It's really interesting to watch all of that evolve.
And the principal participates in that because the principal's voice is really important in the message. The way the communication pattern the principal uses when they send out other messages, we want to capture that as well. Just so you know, we don't use a template. We do not, just fill in the blank on an incident. We write every situation with that principal voice in mind and sharing information that we know will help provide support for students, especially students, but staff as well. So that's what we did to get ready for the next day. We sent that message to principals and asked them to share it with their staff at 3 schools. We had an elementary, a middle, and a high with students potentially impacted. So how do you determine the needs in a building? Well, part of it is related to how much upset you see at school that day. So the elementary school, of course, because of the events the night before, the 5th grade there was in turmoil. And so we immediately called Ursula, and some team members from the crisis team went over to support the students at that building, and in that grade in particular. It wasn't a whole school response, but it was a 5th grade response. So the other schools were asked to just maintain monitor status and take the temperature, emotional temperature of the building. If they needed additional support, we would absolutely send that. But middle schools and high schools have a little more support anyway. They have more counselors, they have a social worker, usually more days per week, and many of them have a psychologist that's there more than half time. So we knew we had some supports in the building. And the crisis team, anytime we have to call out the crisis team, remember we're taking those professionals from another building which also needs their help and support. So we don't make that decision to call in crisis team members lightly. We make it intentionally based on how things are happening in the building. And we rely on the administrators in the building to keep us posted about how things are going. So we sent some team members to the elementary school, but not to the middle school and high school. But again, we asked that they continue to monitor. We checked a couple times during the day to see how things were going and what support they needed. And as it turned out, we sent some additional support to the middle school the following week on Monday. We didn't have the kind of information that we would have liked to have had as early as we wanted. The police initially said they would release the names of the adults killed at 9 in the morning on that Friday. Then they postponed it to 1 o'clock. So we're preparing again for messages to go out at 1 o'clock. Then they said it was going to be 3 o'clock. So this changes dramatically what happens during the day. If we have a message going to families at 9 in the morning, we've got a day with their students that we can provide some different supports. If it's at 1 o'clock, we still have a little time with kids, but when it's at 3 o'clock, we're right at the end of school. Everybody's dismissing.
And I remember, and the police are wonderful to work with, and we are so lucky that the communications people in the Lincoln Police Department are wonderful to us, and we have a good relationship. And we kept going back and forth on, we get out some of our schools get out at 3. Can we push this a little bit? And didn't we they finally said, okay, like at 2:30, they finally said, okay.
We said we would send a message at 3, and their announcement came at actually 3:45.
Right, but they gave us permission.
They gave us the go-ahead to notify our families. And that's important because anytime you send a family message, where does it go next?
News media.
News media, immediately. Somebody posts it on the news media's page, and the reporters start flooding in. So a family message essentially means it's going to the TV stations. So we have to be really cautious of what we write and when we send it, and not violate any of that relationship with the Lincoln Police Department. So that was a tricky one because 3 o'clock on a Friday afternoon is a tough time. We did send the message to the families at the 5th grade in the elementary because that's where the crisis team had been. We did not send messages to middle and high. Why would we not do that? She said couldn't confirm anything yet. That's part of it, but there's a little bit more to it. Our protocol is established to provide messaging when it's the death of a student or a staff member in our building, period. Not when there's the death of a family member of a student. And I think that's a tough one sometimes because our hearts just bleed sometimes for these situations that are so difficult, especially when 5 kids have just lost their parents. You just feel very emotional. And you want the community to come together around them. The problem is the next student who has a close family member die, do we announce that? It crosses a boundary that doesn't really fit with our role. Families, it's hard, first of all, for us to sort out who's important to a child. Would we stop at just parents? Would it be a grandparent who might be raising the child? Would it be an aunt or uncle that's very close to the child? Would it be a close friend who's essentially been with that child since birth? It gets into territory that's too murky for us to manage. So we tend not to send messages unless it's the death of a student or a current staff member. That said, the crisis team responded because there was significant upset in that neighborhood, and we had 5th graders who could not learn that day because they were upset about what had happened that affected one of their classmates, one of their close friends. So the crisis team worked with that 5th grade, had some messaging for the whole class. The team members who met with individual students sent a separate message to those parents, and that's how we messaged it. I will say that we have a great resource in the bilingual liaisons at Lincoln Public Schools, and because there is such a cultural consideration in the way death is perceived and handled in various cultural groups, it's important for us whenever there's a cultural consideration that we access the bilingual liaisons. So we had been having conversations with the liaisons as well about how could we best message this in a sensitive way for the cultural groups that were involved.
We've spent a lot of time trying to come up with the right protocol, and the message is consistency is really important, except when it's not. So, I mean, every once in a while we try so hard to listen to principals, and when they say this is really, really what we need, then we know that we're going to have to, okay, do we need to do something slightly different? But I think all of us are real believers in mostly you need to stick to your protocol, because once you cross the line, then it's a slippery slope.
That's the golden rule in any crisis work. Everybody in this room obviously has a huge brain. You wouldn't be here unless you're doing what you're doing. But you can't get a bunch of people in a room and figure out how to manage a crisis at the time, because you're working at midbrain level a lot because of the stress and the lack of all the information that you really want to have. So you don't try and engineer individual results in a crisis. You follow a process. So get your process in place, one you believe in. And you can see ours, there aren't pre-made messages. There isn't a sure thing we're going to do every time, but there is a process to follow, a logic and rationale to follow, and that's what makes it work.
Okay, you ready?
This one looked a lot simpler than it ended up being. There's nothing simple ever when it comes to anything that has to do with weapons anymore. But so imagine a morning when high school officials discover a loaded gun in the backpack of a student. So what are the first things you do in a school? School protocol. Anybody know what we would do?
Call Joe Wright.
That's my philosophy.
So what happened? A student was in school, and an officer had wanted to talk to him about something else, about an issue going on. And the SRO was busy, so he called another cop. He said, hey, this kid's at school today. Could you go talk to him about this deal? And so the officer talked to the kid in the office, and it ended up the kid was responsible for, probable cause existed that he was responsible for something, and he was going to need to leave with the officer. So the officer, following his protocol, because when you take a kid into custody or an adult, you make sure they don't have anything on them. That was the case. And he had his backpack like all kids do, so the cop looked in the backpack and, wow, there's a gun in there. So that's odd. So the police officer and 2 school administrators and I knew that this kid was being arrested. Kid arrest records aren't made public. They don't talk about kid arrests in the paper. It's not something the press goes with. So if only 3 or 4 people know about this, why would you?
Do you send a message?
Why would you send a message?
If it's contained to just a few people, why notify a larger audience?
And how often is it contained to just a few people? That would be my question. Because we talk a lot, when somebody says, only a couple students know. So what we don't want is a kid going home from school that day saying, hey mom, there was a gun at school. And we haven't done anything to tell them. So I think we've discovered, and this is lessons learned, that the wisest thing we can do is send a message, even when only a few people know. And so we did staff messages, family messages, and in many cases, that takes care of it. We know that when we send family messages, especially to high schools, because that's a large audience, that it's going to end up in the news media. But most of the time, it's pretty quiet. In this particular case, the news media pretty much went nuts on us, and I think it was the loaded gun. And this is another lesson for me. When it's a loaded gun that is in a school, this is a very serious situation, as it should be. Families are really, really worried about the safety of their students. And so we have to understand that that's a serious issue, and it got fairly large on us. Now talk about what the police had determined about the student, that there was no threat.
Okay, so why would you have a gun with you? Any of you? Because you want to commit a crime? You want to use the gun? You want to assault somebody? You want to use it to leverage fear so you can rob someone? Or would you carry a gun because you want to protect yourself from someone who's after you? Or would you carry a gun because you need to get it from point A to point B, and in your travel to point A to point B, you're in a school?
Or you think it's just kind of cool?
So is the nature of having a gun in the backpack, what is the nature of that? Can you determine what it is? You really can't. So what the statute violation here is possession of a gun in a school. The nature of the crime is having a gun, not using a gun, which is different.
So in the family message, we had, I can't remember the exact line, but it was something like the Lincoln Police and LPS Security determined that there was no threat. And that was a line that I will never use again, because families understandably said, how there was a loaded gun in my school. How can you say that there was no threat? And news reporters said the same thing. And so we spent a considerable amount of time explaining the situation, talking folks down, and I think successfully had calmed most people down, we thought.
I thought, Mindy came to the school. We round-robin the message, and the principal actually was taking his kid to the airport and got back in time, and we round-robin the message with him. And the message said, you can't talk about kids getting arrested. It's not okay, and you can't say what crimes they're charged with. But if you read the message, it said a student had a gun, okay, like I just said, possessed, had a gun in the school. We can't say he was arrested, but we said he left with the officer, or the student left with the officer. That's pretty much between the lines, right? And we said, literally, we said the gun was not being used to threaten anybody. So if you read between those lines, it wasn't an assault, it wasn't a robbery, it was a possession case. So that's what we tried to do to tell people what was going on without saying it.
But I think we learned better ways to do that. I mean, I think this was a real learning lesson for all of us. So we thought everything calms down. So couple days later, next week, Joe and I are at the Board of Education meeting, and in the public comment section at the very beginning, a very angry parent gets up and says, "Oh my gosh, there was a loaded gun in school and you did not take it seriously. You told us there was no threat. You didn't tell us the consequences for the students." I'm trying to remember what else he was upset about.
He started saying, "I know you can't tell me
Right,
the consequences,
right. I know
but you
can't
didn't tell us
me-
the consequences."
Right, I know you can't tell me, but you didn't tell us. And what I continue to learn is I just have to remember these are children, and these are families' children, and they care about these kids. And so the minute you say gun, or especially loaded gun, of course they're going to worry about the safety of their children. So if I had to write that message again, I would do it more. I think we were trying to be sensitive, and we were even pushing the envelope in telling people what had happened. But I need to remember sensitivity. Remember, these are people's children in these schools. Now, this is an example of it really helps when you have people in your school district who are supportive. So after a parent or after a person makes comments at the Board of Education meeting, there were Board of Education members who said, we're hearing you, and the superintendent said, "I promise I will follow up." And Steve Joel did follow up. He talked to all the people involved. Do you want to talk about that, or you want me to finish that? He called, so the next morning, Joe and I are called up to his office, and Joe and I are going, "Oh, okay." But you know, when we get up to his office, he said, "I've thoroughly investigated this, and I believe that we did the right thing." And this is why it really helps to have people who are supportive and believe in communications and are behind you. And I think he did say, please rethink next time. Remember, we need to continue to be sensitive. Remember, please share the things that you can and the things that you can't. But lots of learning lessons in this.
So what would, we kind of just said what we put in the message. What would you, if you wanted to kind of sign off on that message to make it work, now you know what the friction was in the community, what would you say?
Advice for us. What would you say in a family message to try and calm the waters? Yes,
Maybe
Wendy.
there was an overlaying theme of that student safety was maintained at all times.
I think student safety should have been higher. Absolutely, that's good advice. I think we would, in most messages we take student safety, it's the most important priority, and I'm not sure we said it exactly like that in that message. And sometimes you're doing something maybe too fast or whatever, so I think that I would certainly put student safety up there and emphasize that we did everything we could to make sure we kept kids safe. Yes?
I don't know, at that point, I just wonder, I can read between the lines that there's no longer a concern with that kid and that gun, but I am wondering, okay, so it's possible that a kid could bring any loaded gun to this building and have it go unnoticed unless they happen to be, so just maybe something about, ongoing continued efforts to, improve, I don't know, safety, security.
That's perfect. I think you hit the nail on the head.
That's great.
I think that's what happened. I think people said, yeah, this kid isn't a threat, but what about the next one that can get a loaded gun into our school? And that's when you get, do you need metal detectors? Do you need to check every one of your students who comes into the school? So I think you absolutely hit that's what we needed to say. Good point. And it's true. I mean, of course, that's absolutely true. You would start to think, oh my gosh. Any questions at all, just in general, about how do you handle a crisis? Any questions? Yes.
My kids have been out of school for a while. Is it required to have a emergency contact that is not living in that household listed on the things? Because if that would have been the mother and the father who were both killed, then how would you contact that
Do you
student
want to take this?
or those students?
We were relying on the police department for that communication, and so they were in touch with the family. And in fact, we left a message with dispatch that if the family would like to reach out to us for some support for their family, they could contact us. And that way it didn't breach the information that the police department had, but we just let them know that we were available. And then if they chose to, they could get in touch with us. But that's a situation that, that the emergency contact happens for school things, not for things that happen outside of school. So we rely on the other systems.
And this is another example of, there are templates and protocol. Well, this particular family was a different culture, and we were also dealing with that. I think an uncle ended up taking the children, but there were some issues with language too. And so I think in some ways, this was an example of so many things were tricky about this that didn't go smoothly. Sometimes we have things that, even in a crisis situation, go relatively smoothly. But this was a situation where every time you turned the corner, there was a unique aspect of it. And I think the cultural disconnect a little bit for us was tricky, even though we had a wonderful bilingual liaison that we were working with. But that's a good question. Yes?
This is more of a comment, just to kind of think about another thing with the first scenario. I work in health services, and we will often send extra support to the health office when there is a crisis response, also because we know that anxiety and grief often manifest in physical symptoms as well, too.
That is good to know. I'm not sure I knew that. Thank you very, very much, and that's absolutely true. This is our director of health services. I don't know. I always get titles mixed up. She is in charge. She's the wonderful person in charge of health services. Yes.
I just had a question for you about how do you deal with this in a situation where you have fatalities. The speed at which social media share out seems to occur puts us in schools in a reactive position where we've dealt with this at Norris in numerous instances. I understand that with what Gretna's been enduring the last few days.
Oh my gosh.
Similarly, the student names were out there informally before they could be released by law enforcement or the school. And what do you do to try to manage that and reassure the public at the same time that things are maybe going viral on social media, that you're doing what you can organizationally to communicate accurate information?
We've changed our protocol a little bit on that. Once upon a time, we would wait until Lincoln Police Department released names. Anymore, but if you wait till the Lincoln Police Department releases names, you're absolutely right. Everybody out there knows. So an example for us is, I think it was last year, we had a student who was going from one high school to another, TCA early in the morning, and it was a fatality. And I mean, in a half an hour, everybody knew who that student was. And so what we do, we go to the family. We work directly with the family, and that might be the principal, it might be Joe, it might be somebody on Brenda's team. And we say, it is so important that we let staff and families know as fast as we can we release the name of your student? And we can almost always, as we talk them through that very gently, they almost always allow us to do that. And that allows us to move pretty quickly. I hate to do that because it feels like you're jumping a little bit, except that you're absolutely right. Our job is to help students get through those humps, and we want to send messages to families so that when their student comes home at night, we have given them information that will help them deal with that. And if we wait for the Lincoln Police to release the name, we will be 24 hours in.
And
so we do it differently than we used to.
there are some things where they'll never release the name, like a student suicide. We had two over the winter break, and so I went to those families and explained to them what the crisis response process is, and the goal of it is to help other kids and to prevent, Brenda can say what it does better, prevent contagion, help people. But I've always had really good luck.
He's wonderful.
If I explain that to the family, why I want to be able to tell people that your child has passed, and I'll tell them the language we'll use. I've never had anybody say no. They say, no, please do, because I don't want this to happen to anybody else. And that's within 5-6 hours to 12 hours of this happening, and I've never had a parent say no.
So bottom line, if the family will not let us, then we have to wait for Lincoln Police. We will not do it without a family okay, because we know that that they have to be in charge of that. But it is a hard balance of the speed at which information flows these days. What do you say? You can't beat the tweet. You can't beat the tweet. So it is the question every single day. Okay, what are we going to do with this now? Because it's happening so fast. Yes.
So I have a question about the second scenario, because this actually happened at a school district I was in before. But what if the gun wasn't found until later on after the school day and a press release comes out that the student's being detained because they did shoot somebody with that gun? What does the school do? Because you've got that kid that had a gun with that backpack all day. What happens then?
That's a really good question. We would walk through our protocol. We would certainly send messages. We would certainly explain our protocol. We'd have to, that would be a team meeting of, okay, this is really serious. How are we going to do this? Now, my bottom line is you're honest and you are truthful. And so you have